For those of you who are just listening and not on the actual watching the video of this, I'm going to lean in a little bit and kind of focus and see eye to eye with, as I look you in the eye as we talk about this. And I say that because for those of you that are just listening, you might have kind of pictured what I just did and how I sat up. So while you're still in that imagination mode, I'm going to do a little experiment here. I want you guys to close your eyes, and there's a few of us on here. Close your eyes. Now, I want you to picture nothing. Okay? So I won't ask you to actually say this, but what nothing did you think of? Because the fact is, we can't imagine nothing. The first time I ever heard this, I pictured this big glowing neon sign that read nothing. I pictured nothing, but it was a something of a nothing. And the fact is, our brains can't stop imagining. We can't erase anything from our mind. We can't, I should say, we can't erase everything from our mind. Sometimes we can't erase anything from our mind and it just keeps going. But our minds are always working. They're always filling in the areas that we don't know, the areas we can't see. So the question is that imagination going to free you or is it going to limit you? Now, before Roger Bannister came along, it was a fact that the human body could not run a 4-minute mile. It was simply a fact. And I'll confess, I don't know Mr. Bannister's story quite well enough to know if he imagined it or it just kind of happened. But once he broke that 4-minute mile, suddenly a 3-minute and 59-second mile was not out of the question, or a 3-minute and 58-second mile. Now, a 3-minute mile, is that physically possible? I don't know, but right now, we currently stand at 3 minutes and 43.13 seconds as the fastest mile ever run. Could that ever become 3 minutes and 42 seconds? Well, that doesn't sound that hard to get to. So even the physical body, there's physical limits, we know, but we don't know where those are. And we continually place in our imagination limits that stop us for no other reason than the fact that we put that limit there. Why would 4 minutes be an impossible number to beat? Well, obviously, because it's a round number. No one ever said a 3-minute and 57-second mile is the absolute limit, because that's not a nice round number. So we put these numbers, these ideas in our mind. We set these limits for no reason other than that we set these limits. We create in our minds obstacles and decide that we can't overcome them simply because we created the obstacle and told us we can't overcome them. There's no math, there's no fact, there's no physics behind these limitations that we set. But on the other side, imagination can free us. It can open up things that we didn't realize were possible before. And if we learn to use that imagination as a tool. Now, I'm a huge fan of Albert Einstein. Not only was he a brilliant man, but he was just an amazing the way he thought about things. And he kind of famously, as I paraphrase this, when he was asked what it was like to be smart or was he the smartest man, he would say he didn't think that he was particularly smart, but he was very curious. And in his early days, most of us have heard of the theory of relativity. He said that started, he understood some of the physics and math behind it, but his general theory of relativity started when he was sitting down one day and he asked himself, what would it be like to ride on a beam of light? And then he closed his eyes and he imagined himself sitting on a beam of light, flying through space at the speed of light. And he looked around him and he saw another beam of light beside him. And he realized that that beam of light looked like it was standing still because it was traveling at the same speed he was. But when he looked the other direction, he saw everything flying by in a blur because he was going so much faster. And the idea of relativity in super simple terms is the way things look or behave depends on the perspective you see them from. But Einstein achieved this idea because he could imagine it first. He pictured it in his mind, not just a daydream, although he did confess that he started out daydreaming a lot. But then he took those daydreams and he built on those. And he added in the knowledge he has to those daydreams, and he put details in them. And he used his imagination to lay a foundation for some of the least imaginative things you can imagine. Okay, there's a bad turn of phrase. The least imaginative things you can imagine, like mathematical equations of physics, concrete laws of physics and how things operate. He got because he imagined them first. He pictured them. He created that in his mind. And everything really is created in our mind first. One of my favorite sayings that I use a lot is everything that mankind has ever achieved from the dawn of creation was once something that never existed, was once something that had never been done. Everything was once never done, never seen, never imagined, until someone thought it, did it, imagined it, experienced it, whatever. There's always, well, everything was a never until it was a once happened. And our imagination is the key to that. We can create things that we want in our mind, and we can understand how things are going to happen. Now, one of my hobbies I have is I sit around and think of business ideas. I wonder how that business idea would work. And I get an idea in my mind, and so far, almost all of them have never come to fruition, and I realized that they wouldn't because of my imagination. But one time I thought, young families traveling have a terrible time getting a stroller through the airport, and it takes so much space and all that. What if you had a stroller rental kiosk at the airport? So I started thinking about that, and I would literally, when I went to bed, lay down, close my eyes, and I would imagine that kiosk, and I would put it at different places in the airport. I would see myself standing on there at the kiosk. I would picture my customers coming up, and I would imagine them coming up and asking for a stroller, a double stroller, or a septuplets stroller, if they make one that big. And as I did that, I would imagine going to manufacturers and buying them and where I would store them. And the more detail I imagined this idea, the more I realized it would not work. It wasn't going to. But I realized that because I took my imagination and not just a floating daydream, but I directed it and built as much detail into that as I could, and recognized that my idea was not a good one. Now, if somebody listening finds a better way to do it and makes their millions, you owe me lunch. And I want the large size fries with that too. But the idea is that our imagination can free us to new ideas. It can give us new perspectives in doing it. And as we learn to control and harness our imagination, it may lead us to new things that we never imagined, to new heights. It may teach us that we need to redirect our efforts and our thoughts into a new way, that we need to find that new dream that the wonderful Mr. Blake talked about as he went through and realized that his imagination started one direction. And as he saw that, said, no, that's not what I want. And he created a new dream and imagined that and built on that. Or it may be like Bob, that turns out to be just the right idea, as Mr. Kobach taught us, that we can take these ideas, We can build on them, imagine them, and create them. But they all start with that imagination. They start with us building on it and allowing it to grow. As Lauren taught us, we need to continue growing that, to not let that limit us, not stop us with our imagination, but continue to grow. And the more we learn to focus that and picture that, the more it frees us. And it can free us in many, many ways. I had to look at my notes to find my name there. Colonel George Robert Hall had a great experience that he talked about with using his imagination to free him. He was a fighter pilot in the Vietnam War who was shot down and captured. And he was confined in this small 7-foot by 7-foot cell. And most people would just go into despair at that point. But he was an avid golfer. And he learned to play golf in his mind. He said it wasn't just imagining being there, but he would smell the grass, feel the wind. He would see the ball, he would get ready and he would swing and hit that. And he would imagine the wind and the distance and how hard he swung. And he knew that that was a 240-foot drive, or he knew that or yard drive, sorry, not foot drive, that'd be a little short, 240-yard drive or a 300-yard drive. And he would go through his favorite course time after time, because he knew that course well enough that he could imagine every little nuance as he did that. And that imagination freed his mind while his body was trapped in a horrible circumstance, but allowed him to be happy, to be able to not fall into that despair. Now, I heard a story of that he went out and played his first game when he was freed and got his best game ever. I'm not sure if that's true, but I'm going to use my imagination and say, yes, he did. He got his best game ever because he had created in his mind. And he had practiced that swing so much in his mind. And when you practice that, when you see that, when you imagine that, you can achieve that. And I know that's a fact because, again, Mr. Kovach here, Mr. John Kovach, one of his jobs has been a coach for high school athletes. And one of his athletes that he had trained mentally to give her the mental discipline to win. And she won one of her races and she was being interviewed afterwards. So he kind of snuck a little closer because he wanted to hear what she was saying. And the interviewer said, how did it feel to cross that finish line first? And her response was, well, I knew I was going to do that because I had done it in my mind so many times before. So it was just expected because I had created it in my mind. And once you've created it in your mind, you can achieve it in real life. And I'm going to flip that real quick and say, if you can't imagine it, you will not achieve it. But if you can imagine it, then there's a chance to achieve it. There's a way. And all you have to do is walk outside and look, and you will see things that people have created in their mind and achieved. Things that 100 years ago or 500 years ago would be unimaginable, like cars or this computer that you're watching and listening to this on. The fact that we can be in different rooms and be looking at each other. That took someone's imagination to create first. And then they went out and achieved it. So imagination, it's that building block, it's that beginning. So I'm going to finish with that quote that I said before. Everything that mankind has ever achieved was once something that had never been done. And because of people's imagination, because they created it in their mind, they were able to go out and create it in real life. So use your imagination, create it in your mind, and then we'll talk later on in the future parts of this series to go and do it. So thank you.